Reverberation is when a sound wave is reflected off of various surfaces, extending its length and gaining a particular character from the acoustic environment. Reverb effects simulate this natural process, and you'll find 3 such devices in Renoise and Redux. Note though that although the delay and reverb effects work by reflecting the input waveform, the purpose of a delay is to create distinct echoes, while reverberation appears to be part of the original sound. By focusing on different things, each effect type features controls best suited for their reflection style. The standard reverb device is very straightforward and highly efficient. This is important since reverb is probably the most common effect used in music. So it's essential for low-powered computers like older laptops or Raspberry Pis to be able to use lots of them in a song, while still providing good sound quality. Each parameter is easy to understand and does exactly what you'd expect. Wet mix is the volume level of the reverberation, while dry mix is the volume of the original sound, with the max level of 0 dB being the same as the input. The reason this is at the bottom is to make it clear that changing this only affects the output. The input volume level is unaffected. Room size sets the size of the acoustic environment, with larger values creating a longer reverberation. Damp controls the filtering of higher frequencies, simulating the environment's sound absorption levels. One reason that this effect is so efficient is that the reverberation is created from a mono-mixed version of the input. So although both left and right channels are still played, this effect doesn't care about left and right. The reverberation will always appear in the center, and the only way to alter its stereo nature is with the width parameter. So, to gain more control over how this works, you'll need to get creative, which we'll come to later, or use a more complex reverb effect. mpReverb is one of those effects, with almost twice as many parameters and a more realistic sounding simulation. The wet and dry mix return, while the room size has become duration, because it allows you to be very precise with the reverberation time. And since the mpReverb respects the stereo nature of the input audio, width can now be used to fully restrict or expand it. Also expanded is the damp parameter, which has now become 3 separate sliders. The first 2 control the low end, while colour boosts the mid-range frequencies to simulate how reflective the environment is. Pre-delay adds an initial delay before any reverberation occurs, to represent how far away the reflective surfaces are. And pan simply pans the entire reverberation around. When a convolver is added to an effect chain, it won't actually do anything at first. And this is because the convolver is unique amongst all of the effects. It requires an audio file to be loaded in. Helpfully, the device has a lot of them built in, and they're accessed by choosing a preset. The convolver applies the sonic character of the loaded sound to the input audio by convolution, which is a more complex intertwining of the sounds compared to a regular reverb. The loaded sound is typically an IR, or impulse response, which is a recording of an acoustic space's reverberation created by playing an impulse, a short sound burst, within it. External audio files can be loaded into this effect by clicking the Load button. This will also enable the other buttons here. Reload will just reload the current file, while the arrows will automatically load in the previous or next file from the directory of the selected file. The parameters below, on the left side, are now familiar to you, with wet and dry mix, and the same pre-delay as on the mpReverb, except that here, its max value is twice as long. Colour is different though, being a broad filter that spans the whole frequency spectrum. More interesting are the parameters on the right side, since they all deal with the audio file used for convolving. Selecting a mono impulse will lower CPU usage for mono files, or by using only the left channel of stereo files. Gain simply controls the volume of the file. Start is where the starting point will be on the impulse response's waveform. Now this is very useful, as it's usually a good idea to cut out the initial sound that created the reverberation, since you don't normally want to include that as part of the convolution. People who create IRs often remove it themselves, while others leave it in, to give you the option to use it or cut it with the start value. Length allows you to stop the impulse response at a certain point along its length, which is done in a gentle, natural sounding way. Resample controls the speed at which the impulse response is convolved at, which affects its length and also its pitch. This change in pitch is going to be a lot more noticeable for some loaded sounds compared to others because, as I'm sure you've guessed by now, these files don't have to be an impulse response. Nor do they even have to be geared towards creating reverb. So this complex and computationally expensive convolution effect can be used to meld any kinds of sounds. Since reverb effects are used so frequently, it'll be worthwhile demonstrating a few creative examples of what you can do with them in Renoise and Redux. First is a reminder about group tracks. Doing this routes all of the different tracks and the instruments playing on them through the group track. Any effects placed here will affect everything contained within. So now you don't need an identical reverb on each track. Any changes only have to be made once, and you save on CPU power. Sometimes you just want the reverb to flesh out a sound while it's active, without leaving long trails behind that can muddy up a busy mix. This can be achieved by linking a signal follower to the room size or duration parameters. With well-tweaked settings, an appropriate amount of reverb will be applied according to the volume of the input waveform. Let's say you have a pretty normal instrument, but you really want the atmosphere it generates to sound distinctive. If it's not likely to be smothered by other sounds in the mix, it can be worth putting in the extra time and effort to experiment with using effects in unusual ways. Here we have a guitar that is split left and right, with each side sent to a different effects chain. There's a long reverb with a bit of extra colour given here, but the real excitement is generated by the flanger, which features a massive amount of amplitude and feedback. There are some differences between the left and right versions because we don't want them to behave exactly the same. Unless you're wearing headphones, it may not be immediately obvious what the flangers do. But if I turn them off and on again, you can hear that it gives the reverb a more complex personality. And turning the feedback up to 100% should clue you in even further. Now, this is a good trick to use when you're fine-tuning the values of a device. Exaggerate some of the values to get a feel for how the reverb is being affected. Then bring it back to something more reasonable when you're done. Routing audio within an instrument and affecting different aspects of it in different ways is an excellent way of getting creative with reverb. Whether it's in the stereo field, like the previous example, across the frequency spectrum when using the multiband send, or some custom method that you've devised yourself. You can do all of this for multiple instruments by using send tracks. Check out the send tracks and devices video for full details on the subject, including several demonstrations of reverb in action.